Tonight, the stunning verdict.
As to the charge of first-degree murder, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
The case that shocked the world.
People don't make accidents look like murder. That's absurd.
If you don't know what happened, that's it. If it wasn't proven to you that it happened, that's it. It's over.
Casey Anthony not guilty in the death of her 2-year-old daughter. What happens now? Will there ever be justice for little Kaylee? What does this case say about America and its justice system? I'll talk to the biggest names in our legal system who've been watching this case from the start and talking to them about one of the biggest upsets in modern legal history. This is Piers Morgan Tonight.
The prosecution did not prove their case. The big question that was not answered, how did, Kaylee die? I think there was probably a lot of discussion that it was probably a horrific accident that Dad and Casey covered up. And unfortunately, it did snowball and got away from them.
That's an alternate juror from the Casey Anthony trial slamming the prosecution's case. The acquittal stirring up some very strong reaction, some calling it more shocking than the O.J. Simpson verdict. Joining me now, jury consultant Joe Ellen Demetrius, former Florida Circuit Court Judge Alex Farrar, Marsha Clark, his former prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson trial, still with me, and Richard Gabriel, who was a jury consultant on the Anthony case. Let me start with you, Joe Ellen Demetrius. Did you predict this not guilty verdict?
Well, I actually predicted the best case scenario for the defense would be a hung jury. So I, like many other people, are very surprised, and it's kudos to Richard Gabriel for that.
I mean, what's extraordinary is that everyone that I was watching on television when it was all going out live was saying that because they were coming back so fast, and relatively fast, 10, 11 hours, because the jury hadn't asked for any supplementary questions at all, the general consensus of all the experts seemed to be, before that verdict came in, they were going to find her guilty.
Well, certainly that was the impression that everyone had. And to go back to one of the things that you were asking Alan earlier about cameras in the courtroom, the one thing that is, I think, a sadness about cameras being in the courtroom is that oftentimes the viewer cannot see what happens when those cameras are off or what happens out of range of the cameras. We don't know from the jurors if any of those things happened, as we know in some of the other high-profile cases. So I think that while it was certainly a shock to many people, the bottom line is, having worked for the defense for many years, is that Jose Baez left this jury with reasonable doubt, and that's the bottom line. And when Shani Mason said that this case was about the what, the where, the when, and the why, that is ultimately what this jury was asked to do.
Marsha Clark, I mean, you've been in the position of having to deal with the jury in the O.J. Simpson case. I heard Nancy Grace earlier saying that this came down to probably 2 or 3 jurors, and they were brilliantly selected. I mean, can the results of these cases literally fall down on 1 or 2 or 3 jurors and the selection process?
Well, it can. It's an interesting thing, Piers, because you have a dynamic, and that's why jury consultants like Jo Ellen can be so very helpful. And I wish I'd had her when I had the Simpson case, but that didn't happen. But you do have to watch out for who you pick, because you do wind up with kind of these little groups. And if you have a leading group, like 2 or 3, that are very strongly pro-defense, or very strongly looking for the donut hole, if you will, as opposed to the donut, that 3 can really persuade and pull along all the rest of the jurors. So what you want to do is watch out for all of the groups that may form and look to who are your leaders and who are your followers. So it may very well be true that a group of maybe 2 or 3 hung together and pulled the rest of the jury. It's entirely possible.
Richard Gabriel, you're a jury consultant. You consulted on the Anthony case. What did you make of the jury process here? There were obviously a split of 7 women to 5 men. Do you think that was helpful in the end to Casey Anthony?
Well, we didn't really focus on the demographics. What we were obviously most concerned about from the very beginning was how much prejudicial publicity there was in this case. So our first process was really deselection, taking away all those people who had really already found her guilty as a result of the media coverage in the case. And then as a result of sort of eliminating the people who were so prejudiced against her from the beginning, we were left with what we thought was an actually fair group, a group that would be able to listen, would be independent enough to really focus on the reasonable doubt and the aspects of this case, and quite frankly would be courageous enough to perhaps come in with an enormously unpopular verdict.
Judge Alex Farrar, I mean, what struck me is also quite extraordinary about this is that the defense opened up by saying our client's a terrible liar, and yet at the end the jury believed her, or believed the defense, or certainly enough to acquit her. Not often you see the defense being, my client's a terrible liar.
That's true. I think I disagree with a lot that the defense did in this case. I also disagree that this case was won by Jose Baez. I think this case was won despite Jose Baez because, frankly, I feel he's maybe a good lawyer, but he's in over his head in this case. I think the problem here was not the weakness of the state's case or the creation of reasonable doubt. I think the jury just failed to follow the law on what reasonable doubt is. I think the jury in this case wanted beyond all doubt, which you can never prove. You know, they were imagining doubts, they were speculating, they were coming up with what ifs, and the only way you can prove a case beyond all doubt is if you're actually a witness, and you saw what happened, and then of course you could never be a juror. So that point I don't think the jury really grasped, because when you heard the comments of the alternate juror, it seemed like they were looking for explanations that the prosecution was never going to be able to provide. The prosecution can prove the elements of the crime. Most of the time, the prosecution can't prove why somebody did something. They can't get into the defendant's mind. They certainly will not be able to call the defendant, to have the defendant explain it. That's why it's not an element of the crime. And I thought the case here was proven quite convincingly by the prosecution, simply not accepted by the 12 jurors who were selected. And that's the bottom line in our judicial system. That's who you have to convince, not the popular opinion.
And
well,
Piers, let me just jump in here. I wanted to add one thing for you. You were talking about cameras in the courtroom. I happen to agree that I think they don't belong there. It's a debate for another day. But let me just say that I do think they have this impact on the jury. The jury knows the whole world is watching when that camera is in the courtroom. Everybody does play to the camera. They don't behave the way they ordinarily would. The jury, too, is affected by the presence of the camera. And I think that the term reasonable doubt, and I really agree with Judge Alex, I think the reasonable doubt instruction is a very difficult one. Reasonable doubt itself, a very elusive, elastic concept. And I think that reasonable doubt turns into a reason to doubt. And every defense attorney in the world, no matter how good or bad, can give a jury a reason to doubt. Oh, she was molested by her father. I haven't proven it, but I've just given you a reason to doubt. That suddenly turns into a reasonable doubt. And the distinction between a reason to doubt and a reasonable doubt is completely lost. And the jury, I think, then winds up acquitting, even though a case has been proven, which I think this one was.
I think that's a good point. I think in relation to if I could just say in relation to the cameras, I mean, my issue really was when I saw these queues of people fighting to get into the courtroom every day and sort of clutching their tickets like Willy Wonka had let them into a chocolate factory. I found that disturbing. That means that a serious murder trial had become a form of macabre entertainment, and that's my issue with that. Anyway, thank you all very much for your time today. Well, yeah, I mean, what would your argument be very quickly? Why do you need them?
Very quickly, we don't have star chamber justice in this country. People can come into any trial and watch it. The gallery only has so many seats. The only thing the camera does is it opens it up to more people. And the more our judicial system is open to the public to see, the more likely we're going to have fair justice. And anything that needs to be corrected will probably be corrected because there's more eyes watching it. So I don't have a problem with the cameras.
Okay, well, people can make their own minds up. I don't agree with that. Anyway, thank you all very much for your time. Casey's parents, George and Cindy.